Walawani, welcome. My name's Ian Campbell from Palliative Care Australia in Canberra on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. Welcome to Thursdays at 3, our regular series of conversations with people living and working at the end of life. Today's conversation centres on the role of carers, the family, friends and loved ones who lean in to support their mate when they're living through a terminal illness. It's care that can last years, months, weeks before someone dies. Important work that often allows people to be looked after at home and fulfill their end-of-life wishes. While caring for someone who's dying can be very rewarding, it can also be mixed with significant emotion, stress and challenges. CarerHelp is funded by the Australian Government and pulls together the wisdom of St Vincent's Hospital in Melbourne, Flinders University and Carers Australia. CarerHelp provides information and resources to support carers in their important work. Joining us today, a member of the CarerHelp Project Team, Associate Professor Mark Boughey, who's also Deputy Director of the Centre of Palliative Care and Director of Palliative Medicine at St Vincent's Hospital in Melbourne. Hello, Mark. How are you going?
Afternoon. Good, thanks, Ian. Thanks for the introduction.
Thanks for making time. Mark, there's around 3 million carers in Australia, and indeed, you've been one yourself, but you work with them every day in your professional life. Where would we be without carers as a community, as a health system? Where would we be without carers?
Look, I think, as you may know, that it may look a very different picture as to the sort of way in which patients are being looked after if we didn't have the formal and informal care that people provide. I mean, for me, carers is all about relational history, relational time between the person that's going through the illness and the people that may surround them and be connected to them. And it's those relationships that come from the past, sort of moving into the present, and the ones that maybe the patient would like to have around them at a time when they're facing a sort of life-limiting illness or an end-of-life possibilities. Or it's the ones that are there by connection, by culture, faith, marriage, partnerships, family, and so forth, or a mix of those, of all of those. It also may be the ones that are just there as formal paid carers, that maybe someone in their life hasn't been in a position to have people that are relational and proximal to them. But they all need to feel they're being supported in the role and the things that they're doing with the ones that they love.
So you see carers as part of that palliative care team. You're there as the doctor, as the specialist. Do you see carers as part of the team that you're a part of too?
Yeah, I mean, I think always. I mean, you're often, in a lot of circumstances, you're either going into their own home or you're coming to see them in a palliative care unit or a hospital ward where indeed they're going to be there and present to the conversations, hopefully. And so I think it's really important to recognise that their ability to communicate to you about their needs as much as the needs of the patient that they're looking after are important, because not only do we want to understand the patient and their concerns, fears, anxieties and say symptoms, but we want to understand their fears and anxieties because in many ways, they are there and they can be there for a number of hours a day. They can be there 24/7 if need be. So we need to understand what's working for them, what's not working for them, what's making it more difficult, what's actually pleasurable and exciting about the prospects.
Can anyone be a carer, Mark? It's a role that often takes a relationship into new places. How do you know you're up for it? How do you know you're up to being a carer?
I think in many ways, I mean, obviously the majority of people tend to already be in a relationship with the person that's going through this, husband, wife, partner, husbands, wives, whoever those combinations are. And I think indeed, I don't think we ever really think about that. We might sort of imagine what it may or may not be like when they've gone through periods of illness or uncertainty or maybe other losses in the family. But I don't think until the sort of issues around their health and how that's being managed draws people into that whole realm of being a carer, when I guess people aren't feeling so able or feeling more disabled or feeling frailer or less well. that, I think people are assumed to be drawn into it, and most really have to learn. It's a new role. It's a new thing that they need to try and consider. And I think in many ways, an invitation to come in would be great, but I think in many ways it's just assumed that this will be part of the life of a connected, married sort of person in someone's life.
Yeah. Something that indeed many of us, most of us, will perhaps find ourselves doing during the course of a lifetime, during the course of a relationship. Is it fair to say most of us will have a caring role at some stage in our life?
I think so. I guess in many ways, in a more Western sort of construct, we call people who look after others carers.
Yes.
And that seems to be something that people really do struggle with, to be recognised as something. But what's interesting is, of course, the Australian government provides certain benefits to people that are carers, and they're not judged on their income and their financial services and amounts. It's not judged in that way, and in fact, everyone's open to get some benefit, whether that be in the context of some funds or some access to other bits and pieces to help them through that journey. So, there is a recognition, but on some level it's not recognised because, again, a lot of cultures and faith have expectations built into the contract of, say, marriage or association of families. And so I think sometimes people don't recognise it because it's an expectation that they've absorbed to be what they need to be without questioning it.
Yeah, I'm married to this fella. I'm married to this woman. It's what I do. Yeah. Mark, let's spend some time, I guess, teasing out some of the challenges that carers face along the way. The CarerHelp website is designed to prepare carers, provide information, respond to common questions, point carers towards additional help. The most viewed sections of the website are the ones that deal with the dying process and managing the symptoms and the emotional weight that comes with that. And I think that sort of reflects perhaps the mystery that many feel around the dying process. And it's often wrapped up in mystery, wrapped up in fear. You see it every day as part of your professional work. What are some of the things that happen when people die? What does the dying process look like? Let us into that mystery, into that fear.
Open the door.
Yes.
Look, it is fascinating because, it may sound a bit glib, but every journey, every kind of the sense of moving towards dying is different for everybody. And so the ability to say this is exactly what's going to happen it can be problematic because then again it builds in expectation for those that are feeling very anxious and fearful. But I think you are right, over the 6 years or so that we've had the active website, it is the most viewed part and the most downloaded part of our CarerHelp website. The actual nitty-gritty of the changes that might be seen as somebody moves towards dying in the last hours, if not days of life. And that has a lot to do with changes, particularly in the way people breathe. It reflects the diminution of conversation with people, whether that's conversation that's confused. People tend to be more asleep, less communicative, less able to do the things they normally would do if they were getting out of bed 2 days ago and no longer they're struggling to turn over in bed. So there's a kind of physical component to it all. And sometimes that can be a slow process, and you often see this in some of those more chronic illnesses, but for some that can be over just a few days into maybe up to a week that this may occur. So it's looking for those signals that this is a time when it's changed. And this is why, in many ways, it's important to have someone around that maybe can help you as a carer recognise that this is occurring. If you've got connected to community services, connected to hospital service or palliative care, it's good to have people that can actually recognise these with you or communicate with you if and when they're happening. But again, it's good to understand what might be happening we often give out brochures that go through the kind of things that are going to be most pertinent. One of the key ones that people often ask about is when people stop wanting to drink so much fluid, or people want to stop eating. And in many ways, that's the body really starting to say, this is no longer as important to me anymore. And that's a very late stage sort of thing sometimes as well.
And Mark, as well as those sort of physical symptoms or that physical decline, is there also some preparation that carers need to do around potentially the conversations that happen during those times? If people still are able to speak and express themselves, I imagine, as well as being prepared for the physical symptoms of death and what death looks like physically, being prepared for what you're going to say, what might be said during that time would be really important too.
Yeah, look, I think so. And again, so much relies on the way in which maybe the person themselves is accepting that they're moving from a sort of possibility of dying to the inevitability of dying. And again, the emotional makeup and the life that they've led may make them communicative people or very uncommunicative people, or they may indeed start to become a little bit confused and distant from the carers. But I think these are the sort of things that can help, I won't say normalise, but at least help carers to understand that, what's going on for them. And this is why the preparation is so important, I think, to understand what could potentially happen. For us, I think it's also important to recognise that helping carers feel more empowered to ask questions of their healthcare professionals and the nurses and the allied health along the trajectory towards dying, and that can be in the last weeks, months or so, be part of the team in a sense and ask questions, particularly maybe if the patient themselves isn't asking those sorts of questions. I think come in as a team rather than as just an individual struggling. I think in many ways carers or partners ask the questions, whereas the others might be fearful, and sometimes vice versa.
Mark, I'm hoping you can do a bit of myth busting for us. I've often heard the expression or the understanding that hearing is the last sense to go when someone is dying. You as a clinician, are you able to shed any light on that? Is hearing the last sense to
Look, I think
know?
I'd like to be a mythbuster, but in this situation, I think there most probably is some relevance and truth to the power of people who are familiar, who are loved. Their voices can carry, and you can often see when dying is inevitable, that they can become a little bit confused and disorientated, but voices that they're familiar with can draw them back to a reality at some stage and can have moments of lucid conversation. I mean, for some people, they are lucid right up until the very last few minutes. But I think in many ways, it seems to be something about that sort of relational experience that draws, I think, into memory. If you're sort of feeling you want to get into the physiology of these things, it seems to be that the areas of memory are the things that are the last to sort of illuminate as dying is occurring. And I think for some, it is that connection to memory and connection that really does play out. And voice, obviously, is a very powerful part of that equation, I would say.
Mark, how can we support our carers better, both as a community, as a next door neighbour, as a social group, but also as a health system? How can we support our carers better?
Well, I think a lot of this is all about recognition. And I think recognition is really important, whether you're a healthcare professional providing formal care or you're a loved one, a family member, a community member, a neighbour, and so forth. I do think recognition is important. If you think many years ago, we didn't necessarily recognise the importance of the community aspect of, say, a lot of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And so we would, now they're very inclusive in not only decision making, but also the meeting spaces that people come to. And so the importance of understanding culture and faith that plays out, and trying to enhance those that are seen as important in that, and the decision making and the connections and so forth. So I think the same can be said of anybody. So I think in recognising it, asking, people what that relationship is and what they're doing, I'm often surprised just how much neighbours chip in or can to people's care. And we can often support people now in a much better way in the community by themselves, even if they don't necessarily have a very proximal community around them other than neighbours and friends and family. It doesn't have to always be somebody living in the house or so forth and being part of that.
And I guess it's also, as you say, recognising the role of a carer, but perhaps asking what they need as well, making that approach, not being scared to engage with carers and asking them, how can I help?
Yeah. Look, I think I always often give this as an example more recently, because as you know, voluntary assisted dying has become available around the states of Australia at this stage. And often people will express a desire to die in some shape or form. And I think it's important for people not to overreact and just diminish that expression of distress, whatever that is, whatever that means. And so one of our CarerHelp pages goes through that, as a carer, what does it mean if somebody expresses a desire to die? Because often I think carers will think, aren't I caring enough? Haven't I been a loving companion? Haven't I been a good wife, husband? What are the children going to think? I don't agree with what you're saying, without exploring it. So I think a lot of it is allowing that sort of ability for integration and conversation to occur, rather than pushing things to the side and dismissing. Because I think often, patients want to express themselves as they're moving towards dying, and I think sometimes they will say things that are seen as a little bit fear-mongering or threatening or anxiety-producing. And I guess it's helping carers to understand that they can ask about these things. Don't sit in fear and anxiety. Try to round out the conversation. And again, community healthcare workers, hospital palliative care people and so forth, they try to be those facilitators if and when they recognise it's not happening in a meaningful way.
Yeah. Mark, you're always generous in sharing your own personal experience as a carer for your partner, Len. What was it that helped you and him through that time?
Yeah, look, thank you. And I think it's important. I mean, look, I didn't know I was going to go through so suddenly the caring role. Obviously, maybe it feels like I've got insider sort of information and understanding, and that's right. But I think you still want to create, or for me, it was really important, and because we knew each other, we've been together 20 years, it was important for me to create a sense that he was going to be safe, and whatever that means. And it often been fearful about when he got towards end of life that he wouldn't feel safe and cared for and sort of supported in a sort of holistic sort of way. And so from previous conversations and threads, I was able to say, work in a way, communicate in a way, listen in a way that would make him feel safe and supported. And even though I might have understood that other things were going on, and outside the room people were telling me what was going on, and at points I could see the inevitable and people would speak to me about the inevitable, they would equally engage at the same time. So it wasn't though I was sitting sort of with bad news. We were getting sort of bad news every day, but it was more about the creating a safe environment, focusing on the needs and exactly what he wanted, asking people to get connected in those needs. I guess one of the things I really learned about it, because we were being relatively honest with each other, or quite honest with each other, and sharing a lot in the reality of what was coming, we were able to have moments of great intimacy. And I don't mean that necessarily in a physical, sexual way, but I mean intimacy in the depth and level of conversations, and waking up and saying, at 3 o'clock in the morning, saying to me, "What's a good death?" and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
having those sorts of conversations. So for me, about being a carer was being mindful of the person, me stepping back from my needs to some extent
Mhm.
and supporting, but also allowing me to express my emotion at the same time, and sort of mix it all together in a way that it did feel quite an intimate process, which surprised me.
Yeah.
I had never
No,
thought about that in the context of my work. Yeah.
no, and that broader, deeper sense of what intimacy looks like in a relationship
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mark, I think many who work in health and the care professions will, I guess, relate to that experience of, being a professional, but then also being called on to care for a loved one in their personal private life. Is there a conflict there that you've got to try and manage when you try to work out, am I the doctor? Am I the nurse? Am I the partner? How did you go with that dilemma, or does it just naturally connect and work out?
Yeah. Look, I'm such a believer in patient-centered care and person-centered care, and I think in my work life as well as my home life, I'm able to step back from this people's situation, and I think in many ways, I think it's hard for some people to recognise when they're putting their, say, emotional needs or their reactivity to a situation, and so
Hmm.
for the person going through things, they wouldn't necessarily feel very supported in that process,
Yes.
And I think in many ways, I feel lucky that I've learnt that through being a palliative care physician, that it's not about my needs in a situation of stress. It's about, yeah, as much about the needs of the person that's going through the dying process. And I think if more of us could feel and think in that way, I think, healthcare would actually feel a lot healthier, I think, at times, rather than just a sort of pragmatic process-driven um, arena. Um, yeah, look, I think I haven't found that difficult. I mean, but I certainly have seen situations, and look, other of our staff that go through things. I
Hmm.
think acknowledging, other of our doctors and nurses going through things. I think it's actually taking the risk to go and see the person, see the staff member, talk about the issues,
Yep.
tell them what we're able to do and be supportive of, allow them to have the time away from work when it's necessary. Don't make barriers and difficulty. Allow them to do it in their way as well. So I think it's, but it is an interesting thing that I think about a lot, because just at the moment we've got 2 or 3 people in our team who are going through similar things with
Hmm.
people that they know, whether that's parents or partners. So.
Yeah. Do you think your personal experience has changed or influenced your professional work?
Um, Look, I think, as I was saying before, I was always very kind of centered, but I think it has taught me um, a lot about the importance of things like silence and stepping back. I physically bite my tongue now and again. I've learned to do that as a reminder, not to hurt myself, but to just say, take time. Don't, you know what you want to say? Just let the
Hmm.
other person
Yeah.
say. So I've learned
Hmm.
things that from my experience that relate back to that. And I do think that we have to also, I've learned, never never dismiss the people that are coming around someone who's loved, and don't try and avoid driving sort of hard decisions um, in those relationships. Allow it to sort of play a little bit. Well, a current example of ours is that we're looking after an older person in the community, and she and her brother have been living with each other their entire life.
Hmm.
Even on their migration to Australia, she's married, she's had children, but the brother was always part of their entire life in their homes, wherever they lived.
Yeah.
And we were struck that he's been doing this amazing job looking after her at home, but he's getting frail. They're both in their late 80s. There are limitations. Family live distance away, like 2 hours drive away, all of them. So it's very interesting just watching that. Maybe a very junior staff person who came with us to see the person was all about getting it all organised and getting them into a bed in a palliative care unit. But ours was more about acknowledging the relationship, that let them tell us the line in the sand that means it's time to maybe go into a palliative care unit. Allow it to be a bit fragile, kind of allow them to come to realise that maybe the care needs to change, and they can still be part of it. Reassure them they can be in the room with them in the palliative care unit. So it's a very current thing that we're working with, and I just think it's important to not sort of break the egg of those sometimes. Sometimes you need to be directive and build a case, but other times I think you can allow it to play a little bit more. And I think I've learnt that as well, that there's no one way, there's no fixed way, or there's no sort of, you've just got to understand who are there for the person and what the person wants themselves. We can easily overthink or overjudge people that need to be in these situations, because we tend to worry about ourselves in those situations rather than what the person's going through.
Keen to make, I guess, as our conversation comes to an end, and the CarerHelp website makes this really clear as well, that the support for carers doesn't stop when the person they are caring for dies. There's some support that's needed beyond the death of the loved one.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And look, I think wherever you live in Australia, whether it's metropolitan, regional, rural, remote, we all need to feel like the emotionality of a death is acknowledged and recognised, and the rituals are carried out in a way that is important, maybe as important to the carer or the care team that's left, as well as the person that's going through that or has gone through that process. But I think in many ways trying to build those relationships with carers before the death equally means it can play out after death, and certainly formal supports. And CarerHelp certainly is enhancing its ability to prepare people in that sort of role, not only for the caring, but also the grief and loss and time afterwards, the practical realities of some of the sort of financial things, and the practical social things about wills and so forth. So I think it's important to think about these things and acknowledge them. I think, yeah.
Because I guess even you start out as a carer for a loved one, and that's a significant change in how you live your life. And then when the person dies, that's another significant change as well. You've spent all this time caring for someone. It's perhaps significantly changed what your day, what your week looks like. And when someone dies, there's a significant change that the carer needs to adjust to at that point in time as well.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think, this is why so much emphasis is placed on that sort of follow-up after death, just to acknowledge things. It was interesting, we were out seeing somebody today, and we noticed on the table, unfortunately, the person we'd gone to see, their son had died recently, and we didn't quite recognise that. But when we were there, we saw on the table from the community palliative care service, there was actually a card of recognition there on the little altar table that they had for the person who died. So I think that was very meaningful to know that something like that, people are still concerned and worried about the carer. I think it's important, even though the carer may never re-examine that or send a response. But for some, it's been a care team for a long time. You think of things like Edge Care and NDIS now. Some of these people in formal roles or neighbours, I think church groups, other groups in the community, so I think in many ways being able to recognise your own grief and work with your own grief and allow yourself to grieve. I think that's really important. The days of dusting everything under the carpet and just getting on with life, should be maybe get rid of the carpet and let the dust come out again. I don't know.
Yes,
But,
yeah.
I think those days are sort of over, but there is still social pressures to conform in some way, isn't it? But I think that's where the website really helps, I think, to often amplify and, again, advocate on behalf of the carers.
Yeah, open those doors. Deal with the dust. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Mark. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ian.
Associate Professor Mark Boughey, who's also the Deputy Director of the Centre for Palliative Care and Director of Palliative Medicine at St Vincent's Hospital in Melbourne, and a member of the CarerHelp Project Team. You'll find links to the CarerHelp website and their vast library of resources for a range of different communities in the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning in to Thursdays at 3, whether that's via PCA socials or Spotify, and engaging in matters of life and death. You'll also find advice, tools and support at the Palliative Care Australia website, where you can also make a donation to support our work. Thanks for your time.